Hello and welcome to this week's Facebook and LinkedIn Live. Thank you for everybody that is going to watch today, if you're watching live or on the replay. Today I am chatting with Katie Elliott, who is an HR expert. We're going to be talking all about what you need to consider before making your first hire. So today's Facebook LinkedIn Live is for small business owners, micro business owners, and people that are maybe considering launching their business but know they need support or will need support down the line. So we're going to be talking all about what you need to consider as an employer and if you're employing somebody for the first time. And I'm absolutely delighted to be chatting with Katie because she is a very experienced HR expert. So we're going to be talking all about the legalities around hiring. So thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to chat with you and learn more about this topic because it can be a minefield and it can be quite daunting.
Yeah, well, thanks again. Thanks for inviting me, Elizabeth. It's really nice to chat and to talk about basically my favourite subject, micro businesses and helping people get started on their HR journey.
Yeah, because that's your job, isn't it? Tell people a little bit about HR Katie and what HR Katie does.
So, very originally named HR Katie is me, and so I set up HR Katie about 18 months ago. I had been working part-time for a small firm doing kind of almost like an in-house HR consultancy role. They were an accountancy firm and used to sort of give me ad hoc kind of client requests. But like a lot of people during the pandemic, the things that worked well about that role sort of fell away because we were all at home anyway, and the hours and the travel and stuff all kind of disappeared. So I kind of realized I could do it on my own pretty much. So it's been my focus of working with people who are really early in their journey with HR. So a lot of my clients that I've worked with have been just starting out. So I've helped them get all their initial paperwork in place and all their kind of processes put together. And then I've also worked with slightly bigger companies when they've got slightly more HRE type issues further down the line. So, but my background as well but my very, very original kind of HR way in, I should say, was through recruitment and in-house recruitment. And then I turned that into a generalist HR role with a kind of engineering company. So I love recruitment. And I always think of it as the happy side of HR. Because you're the front face, you're telling people what's great about the company, you get to meet everyone coming in. So I'm a real big advocate for recruitment being a hugely important part of the process for getting to know the business and getting to know the people, because we hear about it all the time. First impressions count. And that is so true in recruitment. It's so true as a two-way street as well. And I think, again, that's something I sort of try and coach people on and talk about a lot in my kind of posts and marketing information, is that they want to make a good first impression on you, but my goodness, especially in today's market, you need to make a good impression on those candidates as well, because it really matters. It really does matter. And onboarding as well. I know that's something people are keen to talk about potentially as well, but how important making that first entry into the business is, because if you have a strong onboarding process, the chances are people are going to stay that bit longer. Because it's just all about that smooth first impression, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. Mukesh is on. So Mukesh says hi. Hi, Mukesh. Thank you for watching. Hi. So if people, how do you know? Right. So I think it's particularly aimed at maybe really small businesses that are maybe trying to do this on their own, and 6 months in starts getting busy. How do you know? Or maybe it's co-founders or something. How do you know if you're ready to make a first hire?
Well, I think a first hire is obviously a big step. It really is. But you're probably at the point of you're thinking, I can't take on any more work because I can't do it all myself, or we can't do it all ourselves anymore. So if you've got to the point where you're taking on new clients, So you're kind of able to do the sales, but then, for example, if you've got no time to follow up with them and there's no like customer support in place, you know, those are the points where if you're thinking about your kind of HR journey and your HR plan, that's where you need to kind of start thinking about, right, it's time to bring in additional support. You know, so for some people, like I said, it might be that they need customer support. For others, it might be that they need help with the initial sales and the marketing side of things. And sometimes it might be that you can take people on like a freelance basis or even a part-time basis, that you wouldn't have to necessarily make them a full employee. But there obviously are advantages to taking on people as an employee as opposed to a freelancer. Although I suppose on the one hand, there's more responsibility as an employer. Cost-wise, obviously, if you take on freelancers for a lot of hours, that's quite a high cost because, you know, obviously they charge a premium. And as well, if you're taking on more junior people, you know, there's the possibility that you could even think about apprenticeships or those kind of like training programs, because again, there's quite a lot of like support available to businesses for taking on apprentices. And the Kickstart scheme is closed now, but that was a good example of another, you know, kind of government incentive for people to take on younger and less experienced people. So gone really around the houses there, but basically it's when you kind of got to the point of like there's a ceiling and you know that you can't go over that ceiling, that's when you've got the point of like, right, it's time to bring someone else in.
Okay, when you think, when you're dreading more business coming in, I suppose.
Yeah, basically, when you're like, oh my god, someone wants to have another call with me. Like, I don't have time to have a call with a new client because I'm just too busy servicing all my existing clients. Like, you know, if that happens on a regular basis, like, sure, sometimes you have busy weeks, but if that's happening on a regular basis, then it's time to start thinking about expanding the team.
So you talked about obviously the different types, you know, like you've thought about the different types of roles, I suppose. Yeah. You said about customer support, you might have sales. What is there any exercises business owners can do to identify where they need support in their business?
That is a really good question. And like I said, I think it goes back to, although it sounds a bit overkill, having like an HR strategy for like a micro business or even like a solopreneur who's looking to expand, what you need to think about is kind of the long term of where you want to be. So, for example, if the number one thing you're doing is loads and loads of sales, the next part of that, as I said, is the customer services to then therefore support those customers once you've brought them in. So it's actually sitting down and looking at your strategy and thinking, right, if I get from A to B, how do I then get from B to C? Because that's going to be the bit that you're going to need the extra support with, and you're going to need the extra additional people with. And then, so it, like, as I said, it sounds a bit overkill having a strategy, but actually it's just planning, and it's just sort of being aware of like, if the business grows as you hope, where are the areas going to be that you need more support? Or I suppose it's the vice versa thing of like, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm fed up with all my Canva fiddling and marketing and writing sales posts and blah, blah, blah. And I'd like to go back to servicing the customers. So actually what I want to do is bring in a salesperson or a marketing person to take that off me so I can go back to doing what I'm really good at, which is dealing with the customers. So that's what I mean. It's like you've just got to think about what strategy works best for your business, where you want to go, and where your business is going.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about, you touched on different types of staff, so permanent, part-time, freelancers, temp.
Yeah.
So if people are watching this and they don't really understand what the difference is between a permanent person or a freelancer, could you give a bit of a definition about the different of employees or workers or
so workers, employees, everyone, this is the part of HR where people kind of panic about getting it wrong. But I mean, effectively, if you're an employee, you are responsible for putting them on a payroll, paying tax for them, and you have a relationship. Basically, they have an employment contract, and there is like a fixed kind of terms and conditions, and there's responsibilities on both sides. If you're taking someone on and sorry, I should just say that that applies obviously not just to full-time employees. You can be a part-time employee. So just because you're only working 10, 15, 20 hours a week, you're still an employee if you have those conditions met. A freelancer, on the other hand, is someone who effectively works for themselves, pays themselves, and just would normally, I suppose, fill in a timesheet for the hours they've worked. It's a lot more of a flexible arrangement. All you would have to do is pay an invoice. They're responsible for all of their taxes. And the relationship is normally different as well. There's not that sort of same connection of responsibilities, basically, of like that kind of contract of the mind almost, that and obviously some contractors do get quite embedded in businesses, but technically it's a less formal arrangement.
Yeah. And what are the pros and cons then, I suppose, and what's actually the difference then between like a freelancer and a temp, or a temp and a contractor?
So for me, normally a contractor would be someone that's on like a fixed term basis. So you would, have a sort of an agreed, they're going to do 20 hours a week for 6 months or something like that. Temp basis, this has changed a lot since I was in recruitment. But I mean, effectively, it means that you're actually employed by the recruitment agency, but then your work is carried out for the business. So again, that's much lower risk for the business owner because the recruitment agency are taking on the responsibility, as it were, of the employee. The advantage of taking on people as an employee, although potentially, there are costs involved and there is this kind of, I suppose, risk factor of like, if it doesn't work out, then you'd have to like go through a process to remove them, etc. If you're growing your business and you find the right people, then you're really like investing in someone. You can really build a great relationship with them. Their development is your development. It's the development of your company. I would imagine, people are very loyal if you're looked after and they feel looked after. If you have this like contract of understanding in place with an employee, there's so much more you can kind of do to support and help each other. And not just in a sort of like, paid benefits way. As I said, it can be that much kind of bigger picture of like feeling supported, being appreciated, knowing that there is a sort of a future for you, a future career for you available. So there's positives and negatives about both. Obviously, I'm self-employed now, and I've been employed my whole career up until 18 months ago. So, it's a bit of a learning curve for me as well. Mm-hmm. But it's different pluses and minuses for both.
So I suppose there's legality. So I suppose there's less legalities if you take on a freelancer or a temp, because the freelancer, the legalities falls with the freelancer, and temp, the legality, the agency.
Exactly. So if you're an employer, like there's certain things you have to have in place before you become an employer. So one of those is registering with HMRC. One of those is making sure you have employer's liability insurance from a registered insurer. And, you have to have contracts of employment and have everything registered basically and above board. Obviously, as you said briefly as well, probably a pension. As like I said about benefits, you need to sort of think about other things that you would have to kind of cover the cost for as an employee. So there is, there's things to do to get set up for that. When you're self-employed or when you're employing freelancers, etc., they would have their own liability insurance, and that, as I said, they pay their own taxes, etc., etc. So those risks are lower and easier to sort of move forward with, I suppose. there's a few more like registration things to go through to become an employer.
What about like national insurance? Do you have to pay the national insurance? And is that straightforward, or is that because you register with HMRC, you say, and then how does that work?
So exactly. So once you're registered with HMRC, you would get a PAYE reference number. That's your like employer's reference number. And then that would mean that once you start deducting their national insurance and their PAYE, that would all then go to the right place, basically, because that all those reference numbers like talk to each other, basically, and it means that they know that you're paying that for that person.
Is it quite a manual process, or can you automate that? Who does those payments?
It's becoming more. I mean, I'm not a payroll expert, but it's becoming more automated. HMRC are moving towards making their systems a lot more online. And there's a lot of stuff going around about making tax digital that you could speak to your accountant about and stuff as well. So yeah, there's a big push to make things a lot more digital. And there's certain things that are automated. So for example, if you register as an employer with HMRC, you will sort of automatically get your letter from the pensions regulator telling you that you need to declare your compliance with that as well. Like you don't have to seek out the pensions regulator to find out what you need to do. They will contact you and tell you what needs to happen. So there's certain things that are automated. And it is all laid out. I should say, this is not me reinventing the wheel. It is all laid out on the gov.uk website. I have a download about it as well. Like this is all quite, accessible information for people to look at if they want to sort of find what those like steps and stages are that you need to go through to sort of get legally compliant effectively.
Yeah. So this is something you'd be doing the weeks before, I suppose, writing the job ad.
Yeah, so 4 weeks before they recommend for HMRC, 4 weeks before you start employing someone. And you need to have
advertising a role and recruiting at the same time.
Yes, definitely, yeah. And also, technically, if you're putting someone on a contract of employment, they need it within the first 4 weeks of starting. Now, again, you and I know, and a lot of people watching this will probably know that you normally expect your offer letter and your contract before you start. But technically, as long as you get it within the first 4 weeks, that would be okay as well. But again, I normally expect it in advance.
People wouldn't normally hand in a notice unless they had a contract.
Yeah, but there's wiggle room. There's if you need it, but normally.
And can sole traders employ somebody, or do you have to be a limited company? I've put you on the spot there.
I don't know the answer. Sorry, Liz, I don't know the answer to that one. It's not my super expert area.
Yeah, but presumably, if you're a sole trader, you just Google. You'll have to Google it, but hopefully,
or speak to your accountant. I mean, that's the thing I often say. Is if there's anything I'm not sure of, I speak to my accountant, or I Google it, or it's always worth like putting if you're a business, you can always put like a question box on Instagram or something. People love telling you how to do stuff.
Absolutely do, yeah. So we've got to the point, where there's a need in your business. You've hopefully identified where that need is. You've looked at the legalities and maybe got that ball rolling. What steps do you need to take then? You see, you're to the point you can write a job advert. I can start thinking about meeting these candidates. So what advice would you give to somebody maybe writing a job advert for the first time? What do they need to consider going into that job advert, particularly maybe from a legal perspective?
Well, from a legal perspective, the main thing that you've got to consider is make sure that you're not being discriminatory. So there's certain words and phrases that used to be very commonplace that we sort of, in the HR community, sort of like try and get people to avoid using now. They're like dynamic and all of those kind of words that sort of implies an age bracket are things to sort of shy away from. So really it needs to be, it's quite an art writing a good job description, because you've got to make the role sound sort of interesting and exciting, but you can't sort of make it too specific to You know, we only want young women applying for this role because it, you know, that is not appropriate.
Yeah.
And it's and yeah, and you know, that's the thing of like, obviously people are always worried when, you know, in the HR sphere, they're worried about what will happen if things go wrong. That's usually when people call me, when it's sort of already down the line of like there are issues. But actually, even from recruitment, you know, there is, you don't even have to have hired someone. You can get a discrimination claim even at the recruitment stage. So it's really worth bearing in mind, you know, accessibility issues and those kind of things. Yeah. So, but job adverts, you know, as I said, you and I, I'm sure, have seen a million that are just a sort of a copy and paste of a JD, and they just sort of lay out, these are the tasks, these are the roles. But the main thing is that they need to be enticing, really. And especially in this market, you know, there are, I know everyone keeps talking about the great resignation and the quiet quitting and the, you know, there's so many like buzzwords around at the moment. But just from what I'm seeing of my own experience with clients, you know, there really is so many times where things have even got to offer stage and then it's not, you know, the candidate still hasn't ended up coming on board. So there's a lot of stages to get through, basically.
And what's the difference, I suppose, for someone watching this that doesn't know, what's the difference between a job advert and a job description?
So the job description would be more like an internal document that's kind of a record for both the HR files and your kind of internal planning of like, you know, what the expectations are, what the sort of clear responsibilities, that's the word I was looking for, clear responsibilities, and the sort of more kind of day to day. A job advert normally would be a kind of a high level version of that kind of captures the essence of the role, but without sort of laying out in minute detail what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's what I mean when I say it's a bit of a skill to sort of think about actually what's good about this role, what is attractive for someone. You know, if I was to describe an HR job to someone, there's a lot of paperwork in HR. There's a lot of form filling. You know, there's a lot of like dealing with really random requests. I'm never going to put that on a job advert. Must be happy to deal with day-to-day admin. But it's, you know, it's sort of implied and implicit in the role. So what you are going to talk about is, you know, happy dealing with people, thinking on your feet, and, you know, infinite patience is ideal.
Yeah. So you've written your job advert. How do you start getting your ad or your job out to the world? How do you start attracting candidates and meeting candidates? What are the different routes to market?
Yeah, so there's a few different, and particularly, you know, at the moment, LinkedIn is obviously one that people use a lot, use their own kind of network and networks that they know. And then there's the more traditional job boards. Then there's the more innovative job boards, such as Investing in Women, if you are looking for, you know, very specific roles. So it's worth kind of thinking about what's your target, you know, who are the people that you're wanting to attract. If you're after graduate engineers, for example, are they all hanging around on LinkedIn? Probably not, but they probably are hanging around on some of the like university job boards and those more like technical job boards. So it's just thinking about like, right, what's this role? Where does this fit in? Who are going to be my ideal candidate? And then looking at like where the most appropriate places are.
Yeah. So you talked about using your network, LinkedIn, job boards, but also, I mean, it's quite pricey, but there's obviously recruitment agencies as well.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
No, that's all right. I mean, that's I see option, especially for small businesses, but it's something if you're struggling.
Yeah, I'll be honest, a lot of the small businesses I work with don't really use recruitment agencies because of the costs involved. Obviously, when you're looking for more specialist roles, sometimes you kind of have to, because they, are able to leverage their networks in a way that you can't. And for someone like me, that my network on LinkedIn is a bit odd now sometimes, because it's people I used to work with, but those are not necessarily my potential customers and clients. So it's, if you're in your own industry, I keep going back to engineering because obviously that was where I started, but I have a lot of engineering in my network on LinkedIn still, because that was the business I worked in when I first started. So it's useful if you're staying within your industry. If you're pivoting to something different, obviously it can be a bit trickier. And it's obviously knowing how these tools work. So LinkedIn obviously works by people sharing your content, people commenting on your content. So again, if you can make it kind of engaging and sound interesting, and even encouraging people, please share this, please comment on this if you think you might know someone who could help. Because again, that really helps to cast the net. And it's something that I've seen a few people do recently, and had quite good results just from people being willing to help and try and get the thing out there for them. So it's really worth talking. It's good to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got the advert out. We're hopefully now getting candidates applying. I'm getting candidates in our inbox. How can you run a good shortlisting and interview process to ensure that you give candidates a good experience, so they don't, you don't hire them, they're not going to have a sour taste in their mouth, but also ensure that you hire the best person, you hire the right candidate for you. So it's a act, isn't it? So what tips would you give for shortlisting?
I think the main thing is have in your mind, or even a written sheet if you want it, have in your mind a really good idea of some key criteria, because if you meet someone that you really like and they blow you away, but it's just that you get on with them and they actually have none of the relevant skills and experience, yes, they might be a good team fit, but actually ultimately that's not going to be the right person for you to hire, because they don't have the necessary skills and experience. So it's obviously important to make sure that there's a good team fit, and that's why you interview people, because otherwise you would just hire them from their CV. But ultimately have in your mind a clear view of what are going to be a couple of main things that you want someone to be able to support you with, to help you with. Ask for good examples, and then on the flip side you ask how can you kind of keep the process tight. I mean, the main thing is talk to them. Keep them informed, even if you don't know, even if you've got more people to see, literally just that quick email of we've had a few more applications come in, the process is still ongoing, just keeping people updated and not feeling like they've been ghosted, or they just well, I don't know what's happening. Just that flow of information will help. As I said, even if it's a 1 or 2 line to say, sorry, it's taking longer than anticipated.
Yeah.
And the final thing to say about that is, someone once said to me, you never know when those people are going to be your potential customer or a potential candidate down the line. It might be that when your business has grown in 3 to 5 years, actually you need that person's skill sets and you need them. And you think, oh, I met someone who was brilliant at that. And if you haven't burnt that bridge and you've made that whole process smooth, that will, again, help potentially your recruitment long term. It definitely helps keep your name in the business. It's good PR basically to ensure that they have a good process.
And then onboarding. So what tips would you give for onboarding somebody to ensure the working relationship starts on the right foot?
Yeah. So the main thing is be ready, because I don't know about you, but like, I think probably in the past, we've all experienced those onboarding processes where you turn up and they're like, oh, is it today? Oh,
Yeah. I had to have a laptop for my first week.
Exactly. And then you're like sat there like, so like, and it just creates such a bad impression. And it's just a waste of time, a waste of money. Like, no one's doing anything, no one's getting anything done. Like, sure, there's a load of admin to do on that first day. Have those forms printed out, have everything ready to go, have a little plan written out, because really, if they feel welcome and you're ready for them, it's just such a much more simple process. And again, as I said, like, I don't think it's overkill to have a mini kind of like plan ready for people to be like, okay, so in that first week, obviously we need their like payroll forms and we need their like basic information, but we also need them to know how to use the computer software. We need for them to know who our key customers are, or, you know, etc., etc. So you have some ideas that you're not just sat there looking at each other being like, well, I'm really busy and I've got loads to do, so I just need you to help. Like, of course, they're not going to be able to help unless they know what they're doing. So by having an onboarding plan, by being ready for them and having some kind of process that they go through, you know, it makes them feel more welcome. And it's more valuable to you in the long run, because investing that bit of time in advance totally pays off in the end.
Mm-hmm. That's really, really good advice. I've loved our conversation. I think the final question I have, and I think maybe some people have this, is what makes people nervous about hiring, you know, an employee to work for their company, is if it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
How easy is it to then terminate that relationship? Yeah.
This is the less fun side of it. Less enjoy, but it is part of the process. I mean, just briefly, like, obviously a lot of employers still will have a probation process.
I was ask about how long can you put your probation process pay period in?
3 months to 6 months is the usual, but, and this is where HR people will say to you, if you haven't been an employee for more than 2 years, then you do not have the right to take your employer to tribunal. If you're discriminating against people, there is no time limit. But if it's just that it's not working out, they're not right for the role, or you're not working well together, and the decision to move them on is going to just have to happen. There are processes you can go through. You can feed back to them. You can go through, you know, what's called a performance improvement plan, and work with them to feed back and try and improve if you feel that would be useful. And I've seen that happen before, by the way. You know, I've known it in the past where managers have come to me and said they're going to fail their probation. And then when we've sat down and spoken to the employee, we've actually come out with an extended their probation, worked towards a new set of challenges. And lo and behold, like 3 years later, that employee was still there because we sort of managed the process better. So it's not always terminal, but you know, sometimes it is. And yeah, ultimately, it's a difficult conversation to have, but it's not impossible. If it's not right, there are
where you come in, people like you.
Yeah, and as long as you pay people properly, you pay them for all their holidays they've accrued, and you pay them their fair notice. If it's a fair dismissal, you know, it's allowed. It's not impossible. In this country and in the UK, you know, we're not full on like America where they're just employ at will and, you know, you're gone.
Right, tomorrow or something.
2 weeks notice by, if you're lucky. And, you know, in parts of Europe, it's much more on the employees' side that they have a much more strong kind of union type of environment, and it's more in the UK. You know, as I said, because we have this 2-year thing, there is a little bit more flexibility for employers, but it's always worth going through a fair process. Again, just for both sides, it means that those conversations, although difficult, mean that everyone knows where they stand.
Yeah, brilliant. And what sort of services then do you offer, Katie, to small businesses? And, you know, maybe someone's watching this and thinks that sounds good, but I need some hand holding. What sort of services do you offer?
So I have kind of bundles available for new employers. So it is literally the sort of like the starter pack. So a kind of a contract and handbook and everything that kind of gets people up and running as an employer. And then I also have an ongoing HR membership or subscription service. So it's kind of like a retainer light. But yeah, I have a monthly membership where people get time with me each month, but then they also have access to a whole bank of how-to guides and template letters and other information that they can sort of DIY a bit of their HR, with support from me. And that's called the HR Hub. So that is on my website as well.
Brilliant. So where can people find you, connect with you and learn more?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Katie Elliott on LinkedIn, and I am also on Instagram, much to everyone's shock. But I'm hr.katie on Instagram.
You actually have a really good Instagram. It's quite funny of you. They are not quite. They are funny.
I'm hilarious. Please come and follow me. And I also have a website. That's the last place. Website, hr.katie.co.uk.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much. We'll put all the links. If people are watching this on the replay, you can watch the replay and get all the links on the website. So the Investing in Women website. So thank you so much, Katie, for your time today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to find out more about hiring your first employee.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.